Hey everyone, welcome to the Other Side of Addiction podcast. We are here with our special guest today, Jon Redd. We're going to be talking about prayer and desperation. Jon, thank you so much for being here with us today. Greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we'll kind of go into this after I introduce Mason. So Mason, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Brother, sister, for being here.
Brother, sister, whatever. I got no pronouns.
I have no pronouns. So yeah, thank you for being our guest co-host today. Gosh, we've had some really good shows already, right?
Yeah,
the first show was flipping phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I know this one's going to be too. So yeah.
Brendan was awesome, dude.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
He was great. Jon, you and I were introduced to one another at a networking group in Farmington, right? It's one. Actually, I think they had one there yesterday.
They did.
Yeah. And I wasn't able to make yesterday because I was speaking at a Women's in Business, and then I had a meeting right after that, so I wasn't able to attend that one. But I'm sure were you there yesterday?
Yeah, it was a good lunch. It's just a lunch where some people who work in the industry, in the recovery industry, get together and we try to figure out how we can help people better, really.
Yeah.
And so we kind of come together, we pull our resources, we try to figure out what we can do to help the people who are suffering.
And I love that. And the first time Jackie, who I just love the hell out of Jackie, she's been on our show twice.
Yeah.
The first time she what word am I trying to say? Invited me to the networking group. I went out there and I thought, yeah, this is pretty cool. And it really got my wheels turning. And then I went to the one 4 weeks ago. And when I left that one all the way home, I'm going, I need to start a networking group here in the Salt Lake Valley. And I want to do something different. And it's crazy how when you get ideas, how sometimes if it's the direction you're supposed to go, how what I call my higher power, God, kind of starts leading you down these certain paths. I got a phone call from a buddy of mine, and he goes, Al, my friend Alan and I, you know Alan? I'm like, yeah, I know Alan. He goes, we've been working on something and would like to invite you to a meeting. I'm like, all right. And I says, can you tell me a little bit more? And he goes, it has to do with networking. And I'm like, all right, well, I've been networking for the past 10, 11 years, right? I love networking because the relationships we get to build. And I says, all right. So he goes, it's Tuesday night at 6 o'clock over at Alan's house. I'm like, all right, I'll be there. Of course, I get in there and Alan opens up the door and I'm joking with him. I'm like, guys, if you're tricking me into an MLM shit, I'm out this freaking door right now. And they're laughing and they're like, no. So anyway, have you heard of BNI's?
I have not.
So BNI's is a business network incorporated.
Okay.
There are chapters all over this valley. It's a nationwide thing. It's grown. And basically it's a networking group, but it's different. It's only one individual from each group. So like if I had I'm just going to use a BNI, I won't use a name because I don't know what their laws are, but just say I had a chapter, a BNI chapter, and I invited you to come and see if you'd like to join my chapter, which costs now, it's like $1,200 to join. You would be the only person in the recovery realm that could come to this BNI meeting. No one else could come in. You basically you've got it. I don't like the concept because I think it takes a number of us to, especially in the recovery realm, you just said it takes a number of us to make a change, right?
Yeah.
Chambers, they do networking. I love a lot of the chamber networking things. It's a lot cheaper. It's also a little more open. So anyway, long story short, so we can get into your show. The way they have structured this, my flipping wheels were going like crazy. And I'm like, oh my heck. And we're going to do the same thing as BNI's, open up a chapter. And we're gonna do a networking group, possibly Tuesday. We're gonna have this one group kind of come in just to start getting people familiar with it.
Yeah.
And so I got a hold of my buddy Cap, who does a lot of things with Renaissance Ranch.
Yeah.
Called him up and I said, hey, I've got this thing that I'm thinking about doing, and they'd like me to be a chamber president or a chapter president. Would you be interested to where once we build this thing, break it off, and you can start a chapter? Because you can just start branching off, right? To build chapters. He's like, oh my gosh, I love the idea. Yesterday, Jackie called me, and I threw it at her, and she's like all excited. Yeah, you just let me know, you know? So anyways, I think it would be really good to have a little bit more of these, but have more under the umbrella. So have people come in that specialize like in mental health and traumas and sound therapy. And so we have more resources out there, right?
Yeah, the resources are there. I think it's more a matter of figuring out how to plug people into the resources.
Yeah, into the resources, yeah.
I've worked at a couple treatment centers, and, we can get to this, assuming we get to this, but I'm in the process of setting one up. And for me, I've been really specific in that I really don't care where someone goes as long as they get the help they need.
Yes.
So I always have put recovery before rehab. And it doesn't matter where I work or what I do, because I feel like on a lot of levels, it's our job to try to help God's kids who come to us who are struggling, and He'll sort out the details. And it doesn't matter where they go. It matters that they get help. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that you can give somebody is some hope and some help when they're early on in the process. And there's different things that fit different people. And so I'm a real 12-step guy personally, but I know it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
And I don't force that on anybody, but I just know that there's enough options out there for people who need help. And a lot of really, really good options.
Yes, there are.
And so why not just put people where they need to go?
Yep. Well, and to let them know as well, right? Because there are so many out there, like you're saying, but a lot of people don't know about them. You know, and it's crazy. Brad, who's the owner of Resilience Talk Network, when we were first talking about starting this podcast up, and as we got going, he goes, Al, you watch. He goes, pretty soon people are going to start calling you. And I'm like, yeah, they're not going to call me. And he goes, no, they'll start calling you, and they're going to ask you about places that you believe in. And I'm like, no, that's not going to happen. Yeah, it's happening. I mean, I just had one just on Monday, last Friday, the same way. A week even before that, where someone's calling me up or sending me a text and going, hey, I have a family member that's struggling and they're ready to get help. Who would you suggest? You know, who do you recommend? And again, there are certain ones that we have that we really support. However, I also let them know this still may not be a fit for you.
Yeah.
Because my wife went to 8 recovery centers. And we've had guests come on the show that said, I'm a big step person. This is what I did. This is what worked for me. We've had other guests come on and go, you know what? I fell back into like the American Indian type.
Yeah.
You know, where the
the
spiritual type thing. And we've had people on from TOSA, from the Other Side Academy, going, that saved me. We've had people from drug court. There's so many out there. It's just, like you said, what shoe fits your foot, right? Most comfortably, that gets you through it. And I think a lot of people, too, will give up after a couple times because they think, oh, this is all bullshit. I've gone to this, and this is the same, this is the same. And they don't know there's other resources out there. And we want to make sure that we get it out there like what you are, because it's about the individual.
It's about the individual. And so many people struggle. It's, I've read things that say the average amount of times that people go through treatment is about 7. I was reading something last night that said over 46 million Americans qualify for a substance use disorder, which is 16.5% of the population. And so that doesn't mean these folks are looking to get help, but if you went through like the DSM-5 criteria, they qualify, which means that, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that the only way that we get to actually address the problem and get to try to provide like answers and solutions and to help people is when we can raise the level of conversation. And so that's in part my hope for being here. I I'm going to tell you, like, this terrifies me. On my way here, I was getting little panic attacks on my way, and I've been on a few podcasts before, and it seems to be my natural routine of just freaking out a little bit before I show up. But I have a life today that's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And it is a life that I would not trade for this world. And how dare I not try to give some of that back?
Amen.
And so I know that with that in mind, I get to show up today.
You know, and when we first met, you talked a lot about that, you know? I mean, I felt it from your heart right off the bat. I mean, you are definitely genuine through in and throughout. I mean, you are. And I find doing this podcast and having the people that have come on this show all that same way. You know, they have gone through shit in their life, right? And some have been eyeball deep in the muck, and somehow, some way, with help from a higher power, whatever their higher power is, and have been able to pull themselves out one tug at a time. And I get emotional talking about it. I would spend an 8-hour day in a room full of people like that any frickin' day. And I've got some good friends from the past and things like that, not knocking them down at all. However, I would trade that to be in a room full of people like yourself because of the spirituality, the way that they look at life, and how they want to give back. And that's, I think you and I spoke about it during that networking group. That's what it's all about, right? Is giving back.
I think that's like the key to happiness in this world. The key to actually, it's a strange thing because I always put this focus on happiness, and happiness is one of many emotions. It kind of comes and goes, and different things happen. But what I found in my life is that where I get to experience like actual joy is to the extent that I'm willing to give.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be big things. It just has to be the time, the effort, the thought. And so I wake up in the day, and in the morning I go through like these little dailies that I do, and part of it is prayer and meditation, and part of what I ask for in the morning is an opportunity to help God's kids. And I'll tell you, I seem to get those opportunities only every time that I ask. And what happens after I've had that opportunity is I realize that my life is pretty amazing today.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I'm happy. I feel joy. And it is a beautiful thing considering that I tried for so many years to feel nothing at all.
Yeah, to destroy it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen.
Run away from the emotions. I had someone tell me that, like, happiness is like a circumstance and joy is a choice. And, like, because, like, I mean, happiness is circumstantial because it usually comes back from other people or other things. But, like, going on to, like, the spiritual connection, I love that, like, even reading your bio, like, with the facility, the residential facility that you're putting together with that. I love that because once I started, like, meditation, spiritual practice, and then, like, actually, like, found out, oh, I can find joy in literally everything. Like, every little thing, you can find joy.
You can,
Yeah.
pretty much.
Well, and I think you nailed it. I think that it's a choice. And it was explained to me early on that I have a choice whether or not I have a good and bad day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't necessarily get to choose the things that happen in the
Yeah.
day, but I choose how I perceive it.
Yeah, the reaction.
And I choose how I
Yeah.
react to it. And based on that choice, I get to determine what kind of day I have.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of those things that was just liberating. It freed me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do we want to? Our friend Curtis Marsh kind of put it this way: do you want to go through life picking up rocks and putting them in your backpack and carrying them around, or would you rather pick up those rocks, put them in your backpack, and turn them into gold?
Yeah.
You know, and
Or use
carry
those
around the
rocks
gold.
to keep working out and get ripped. and
Yeah,
shred it,
yeah.
You know, it's take any matter and turn it into your own. You know.
There you go. There you go. Now, you've battled addiction twice. Is that
Yeah.
correct? I mean, you kind of went in through your addiction and got yourself out of it and was doing great, and then went
And
right
then
back
back
into
again.
it because of an injury or an
Yeah.
accident, right?
Well, so do you want me to kind of explain how that came together?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I was, Well, I don't even know how to explain it. Besides, I was just a kid who was so anxious all the time. And I remember, like my entire life, I remember always thinking there was something wrong with me. I was one of the kids my parents put into counseling when I was probably 12 or 13. So at that point, I knew something was wrong with me because they're putting me in with a counselor. And I looked at other people interacting in this world, and I just thought, man, they've got something figured out that I don't get. And at the age of 14, 13, 14, in between 8th and ninth grade, I had my first drink. And something happened. That night I learned how to pronounce Smirnoff. I went out in the neighborhood, and sometimes you hear of the bad things that happen. And what happened for me is it was the first time I can actually remember making eye contact with the girls who I thought were cute. I thought I was funny. I thought the people around me thought I was funny. And I thought, man, this is how I'm going to be a part of this world.
Yeah.
I didn't realize at that time that these decisions would lead to so much more. So by 18 years old, I'm just skipping, like, a lot of that is the same for most of us. But by 18 years old, after high school, I was no longer living at my parents' house. Had kind of been sent out of the house, and this addiction's a weird thing. This disease, what happened in my life is I crossed lines I said I would never cross. And I didn't actually realize I was doing it until afterwards. But I was never going to use cocaine. It's too heavy. Bad drug. Like I'd heard about cocaine. I for sure was never going to be a heroin user. And what happened when not living at home and the people I chose to be around is I got to a point where I was shooting up heroin and cocaine on a daily basis. And I was 18 years old, and a lot of the people that I was around were doing it, and my life had become, it was just bleak. It's an interesting thing to be 18 years old and to feel like you have the whole world ahead of you, but just kind of wishing you would die.
Yeah.
And what happened in my life at the time is my mom had called me, and I was living down in Salt Lake and hadn't seen her in months. And she said, John, I want to come see you. And I remember saying, there's no way you're coming into this apartment. And she said, John, I don't think you get it. I actually just want to see you. So she pulled up, and I remember looking out the window and making her wait because I was so ashamed of the person I had become that I couldn't even go down to see my mother. And I walked down, and what she told me was, hey, I want to help you. What can we do? And I had this little burst of courage, and I asked for her help to go to treatment. And so at this time I was 19. So I was 19 years old. I was in treatment. I was an IV heroin and cocaine user. I was shooting up speedballs. And I went into treatment, and something happened. I went to treatment, and I was surrounded by people who understood how I was thinking. I didn't feel like it was judged. I didn't feel like it was abnormal. As you were talking earlier, when you get around people in recovery, there's just this feeling. And I finally thought, I found a group of people I belong to. And so I went to treatment. And I thought that was what I was going to do with the rest of my life. So eventually I went to the University of Utah, and I got a degree in psychology. Mm-hmm. Went to the Graduate School of Social Work and earned the credentialing to be an LSAC, so a licensed substance abuse counselor. Now it's a SUDC. Got married, started a family, and decided I was going to do something different with my life because the fear of providing for a family became a little much in that with the credentialing and the certificates I had. It just wasn't paying anything at the time. This was a long time ago. This was 97. This happened.
Wow.
And so I went to BYU and I got an MBA. So it's an interesting thing, like when I talk about my education, because there's really no career path from psychology, stint at Graduate School of Social Work, an MBA. And in looking back at my life, I just realized that I was somebody who was just so full of anxiety for so long that I stayed in school because it felt safe. And I stayed, I did things that allowed me to feel safe. And so the second part of all of this, so I went to rehab, immersed myself in it, pursued it in education, got married, and thought I'd go a different path in my life. And the second part of my story happens after I graduated the MBA program. It was back in the March of 2003 is kind of the time I can take you to in my life. And my wife was pregnant with our twins. She was 7 months pregnant with our twins. My oldest son was 2, getting ready to turn 3. I just started a job with Johnson & Johnson. I was moving down to Las Vegas. We were selling our house. It was a dream job. And I had arrived. Like, my world was set. It was more money than I was ever going to make. And I remember thinking how great life was. And I went and saw the doctor before we moved, and my wife was pretty insistent that I go and get a couple checkups and different things. And the doctor called me the night of St. Patrick's Day of 2003, and it was 5:45 at night. I was out home on the cordless. It wasn't a cell phone. I remember this. And he called me and he said, "John, we ran your test results, and I got them back, and they came back suspicious." And I remember having no idea what suspicious meant. So I asked him what suspicious meant, and he said, "John, you have cancer, and I need you to come in first thing tomorrow morning. I'm going to clear my schedule, and I need you to clear yours." And I went into the doctor's office the next morning, not really knowing much about cancer, not knowing much about anything. And I asked him what the prognosis was, and he said, "John, you have stage 4 thyroid cancer. It has metastasized all through your lymph nodes." And I asked him what we were looking at, and he said, "Worst case scenario is generally 6 months in these cases." And I remember I was in the doctor's office for probably another 10 minutes. And I don't remember anything else he said.
I bet.
But I remember thinking, who's going to raise these twins? What's going to happen to my 3-year-old? Like, what's going to happen to my family? And I got rushed in for a surgery. And as a result of the first surgery, they severed a branch of my spinal accessory nerve on the side of my neck. And I left the hospital with oxycontin. And this was in 2003. And so I've thought back. So I've been sober almost 5.5 years. And I've thought for 5.5 years, trying to remember how much pain I was in at the time. And I remember I hurt. But the thing I remember the most is every time I took a pill, all of a sudden all my fear of dying went away. And I thought, okay, you know what, I'm going to die, and I'm going to die soon. And this is the way that I get to that point. And it started for me. So it kind of tells you what the first part of it was, which was an IV drug user, 19 years old, raised in a good home, amazing parents, and went to school to prevent all this, and then diagnosed with stage 4 cancer.
After your dream job just came out.
Oh, it just came out. Like I thought I was on top of the world, and there's, sometimes I refer to the big book of AA, and there's a part in the big book that talks about being the actor and the director and arranging the lights, the scenery, and the ballet. And that's what I'd done, and the show was coming off perfectly. And then everything kind of got pulled from under me.
It's like riding around on a magic carpet and then somebody reaching up and going, "Nope." Right? Right? Yeah. Damn.
And so it's an interesting thing, because at the time I couldn't believe all of this was happening. And I think hindsight can really be a blessing if you take the choice to look at it the right way. Because in my life today, I look back at it, and cancer is one of the things I'm most grateful for. Because without that, I probably would have just gone on my little life the way I'd gone on, and I wouldn't be here. And the fact that I get to be here today, and I get to live the life I get to live today, is a big deal for me. And so I get to look back at it with a different level of awareness, a different level of appreciation. But I had gone through the process of going through all the treatments, I had another surgery up at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, went through rounds of treatments, and still had cancer. And so it was roughly 3 years after my first surgery, I went back to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and had what was my final surgery, like my final major surgery while I was there. And I remember after that surgery, the doctor came to me and the doctor told me he had great news. And he said, man, I've got it all. And I think anyone listening would assume that's great news. And at the time, I remember sitting there thinking, okay, now what am I going to do with my life? I was hooked on pills. I was drinking probably a fifth of vodka a night just to be able to fall asleep. I felt like I was detached from everything. I was holding on to a job as best I could. And then I had this thought that was, Jon, you've attended a master's program in not using drugs and alcohol. Pull yourself out of it. And so over the course of the next 10, 11 years, I tried to pull myself out of it. And it's an interesting thing the way this disease works, because for me, it's something where the more effort I put into it, the worse it gets. And the worse it gets, the more effort I put into it. And so you hear this vicious spiral, and that's exactly what was going on in my life, was that I was in the middle of this vicious spiral and I was going nowhere but straight down.
Yeah.
And so we did a lot of things to try, my family and I, did a lot of things to try to change it. One of the things, we were living in Las Vegas, so we moved back from Las Vegas. And, somewhere I thought maybe Las Vegas was the problem. And if anyone's done a geographical, they can kind of relate to that. But I brought the wrong person back from Vegas. I brought me. Because I still had my problems when I moved back up. And so if there was a way that I could have left me in Vegas and somehow came up with my family, I would have been just fine. But the problem wasn't Vegas, the problem was me. My wife and I, we had another son. We have another son. This kid's amazing.
So your wife, who was pregnant with the twins, stayed with you throughout all this battle.
She's pretty amazing.
Sounds like it.
Like she's a warrior. And
yeah,
so,
sounds like she is.
So she stayed with me through cancer and then through all of this. And it was bad enough for me. I didn't realize how much of this related to substance use, how much of it related to mental health, or how much of it was just physical cancer, aftermath, side effects, all of those types of things. It was just a big blur of a mess for me. And I always thought, well, I'm blaming cancer, or I'm blaming this. And I didn't realize how much of it was linked to the drugs I was taking and what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't even think at the time that was the problem. I thought I used those to address the problems. I thought my work was maybe the problem. I thought my health was the problem. I thought, sometimes I'd think, well, my wife's the problem, and this is how I cope with all of that.
Isn't that how addicts justify their use, right?
Oh, man, I was so good at that. Yeah. Like, so good, but also probably so bad. Mm-hmm. And so we had another kid. We moved back up, and what happened in my life is I started losing all the jobs that were so important to me in rapid succession, to a point where it became difficult for me to even try to apply for a job because I didn't think I'd hold it. And it had just gotten to a total mess. In my life, probably one of the ways I can best describe how bad it had gotten was that my parents and my in-laws had gotten together, and they were talking with the state to try to figure out if there was a way to put me on permanent disability, because they never thought I'd be able to be a part of this world. And, deep down somewhere, I thought they might be right.
Yeah.
And it had gotten that bad.
Wow. You know, that's such a dark place to be at, and I can't imagine it because thankfully I've not been that part of my life, so it's hard for me to really understand that feel. I mean, I can see how you're feeling by your emotions, but to say, man, I get it, I mean, I don't. You know, I just can't. I guess I could say I can't imagine being there. You know, especially after thinking you got the world by the balls and life's finally going your way, just to have them frickin' cut right off, you know, basically.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine that.
Well, and I tried everything I could think of. I thought maybe pills were the problem, so I'd try alcohol, and then alcohol is the problem. So I had a degree, so I knew how much of it. I knew how to detox myself. I knew how to taper it. I knew how to, and it was just so much emotional and mental energy trying to figure out how to fix me. And what happened in that process is all the energy I put to it just got me worse.
Well, and you said just a little bit ago how when things was going off track, how you did everything you could to take control back of it, right? To try to bring it where you wanted to go, just to realize that you're not going just so you could do more, going back and forth. And I was talking with a gentleman yesterday, and basically we do that. Society has molded us to think that we can control everything around us, and we don't have that capability. It doesn't happen, right? Life happens to us, or no, life happens for us, no, to us, not for us, right?
Yeah.
And when I finally, the light bulb went off for me, and even through my addiction, I didn't even really think about it. It was happened just because of my wife's addiction. I finally had to throw my hands up because I was doing everything I could to control her, to help bring her out of it. I've shared many times on the show, I got in an argument with one of her therapists from Phoenix when she says, there's not a damn thing you can do. I said, bullshit, you effing watch me. You watch me. I'm going to fix this girl, right? And my wife does not like that word fix because she said I wasn't broken, right?
Yeah.
So it took me a lot of time to realize. And even with my own life, you know, and it's still something I'm working on. You know, I still let my vehicle drift over into the other lane, you know, and think, well, I'm going to correct it, and you overcorrect, and what usually happens, you get in an accident, right? So now I do my best to just say, okay, well, if this is the rate it's going, as long as I just stay focused where I'm going, you know, and keep that positive attitude, my car is going to come back. And again, it's something that I'm working on and still building that faith, knowing it's happened. And it happens. I see it. Yeah. I see it happen all the time, but yet there's still times where I'm still grabbing that wheel, wanting to frickin' take control of things, you know. And I think if people, you don't have to battle an addiction. I think even just with life in general, and it says it in, what is it, the 12-step prayer, right? God help me. Gosh, I usually know this because I've gone to so many AA meetings with my wife, but, you know, help me control the things, or...
the Serenity Prayer.
Yeah, the Serenity Prayer.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change.
Yep.
Courage to change the things I can.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
And all of us can learn from that, right?
Absolutely.
You don't have to be an addict to know that Serenity Prayer, because it helps in life all the way around.
Yeah, the whole way through. I think sometimes we don't give ourselves enough of a break for just having human experiences.
Right.
I think we expect so much out of ourselves, and we set these expectations, oddly enough, on ourselves that I wouldn't really set on anyone else, that are unrealistic.
Yeah.
And then I get upset when I'm not living up to these unrealistic expectations. When, for me, that's where grace comes in. Because we all get to have this human experience together.
Yeah.
And part of the beauty of life is having the experience.
Well, yeah. I mean, you nailed it. It is having that experience, you know, and that's what's helping us grow, right?
absolutely.
You know, I've said many times on our show, my good friend Nicholas T. Smith, when he was here on the show, you know, he talked about if you really start connecting the dots backwards, and I know my listeners have heard this many, many times, and I just really like using it because it's so true. You connect the dots backwards of your life, not going forward. And if you connect them backwards and you really start paying attention, you're going to realize I'm here this moment for a reason. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be today. Yeah. And you had to experience each one of those dots to get yourself to where you're at. And unfortunately, there are those that, you know, the addiction or life, whatever it may be, takes them. You know, they either commit suicide because they can't deal with it anymore, or accidental overdose. Yeah. And I have learned that accidental overdose is exactly that. No one wants to overdose, right? No one wants to basically kill themselves with a drug. And, and it's sad that there are those that have lost it. However, there's still a lesson behind that, because a lot of things come out of it. And there's been good things that's happened to family members, unfortunately, who have lost loved ones, especially a child. I just can't imagine losing a child. Yeah. You know, especially to a drug or even an accident.
My in-laws, and I don't think that they would be upset if I told you this, but they buried 2 of their sons.
Oh my gosh.
From this disease. And for the last one, I was working in recovery and trying to help in the process as best I could. And it was heavy, and it's not anything that I would wish on a soul, but I do believe that there are some of us out there where the only escape that they get from this disease is that.
Yeah.
And I have to trust, I do believe, I choose to believe that he's in a better place and he's helping us from where he's at.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that. And I'd like to say this before we go to a commercial break. We had a beautiful lady on our show who was from Arizona, 19 years clean. Now her 30-year-old son is battling an addiction. And like a lot of parents or even spouses, you're always afraid every time that phone rings, right, that you're going to get that devastating news that your loved one is no longer with us. And she said she was in church one day talking to one of her friends, and her friend told her this, says, if your son loses this battle, he's been called back home because God knows the battle's too hard for him, and he's going to help him get back on his feet by bringing him back home. He's going to put him in a better place, like what you said. Those that go through it, like you, Mason, other people who have been on our show, my wife, those are the people that are basically like Jesus's disciples. You know, he didn't pick the perfect ones, right, to go around and spread the word. Now he's using people who have lived it and who have walked it to now spread the word and go out and start grabbing other people's hands and go, let me help you. So they're almost like the angels now, right, to go out to lift others, because as that grows, right? I mean, Jesus picked his disciples to go out everywhere to spread the word. That's exactly what people in recovery are doing. They're going out and they're spreading the word, going, damn it, it's impossible. It's possible. It is possible. It doesn't matter how hard it gets. It's possible. If you choose and believe, it's possible. It doesn't matter how long you've been in it.
No. I heard this analogy one time, and maybe before break I'll just leave this analogy because this is the one that made a lot of sense to me. And it's as if you're like just almost as if you're walking down the sidewalk one day and you're not really paying attention and you slip, and what you realize is that you've fallen into this dark hole. And you're deep in this hole and you can't figure out how to get out of this hole. And so you see someone walk past and the person says, yeah, I'm a doctor. I'll help you get out of this hole. And writes you a script and throws it down in the hole and says, come into my office Friday at 9. I have availability. And walks off. And you're sitting there in this hole. And the next day you see someone walk past and you're not even sure if it's worth asking for help, but you look up and you ask for help. And the person says, sure, I can help you. I'm a priest or a minister or somebody. I'm going to have a sermon on Sunday at 11 about getting out of dark places. Come to church Sunday and I'll help you. And they walk off. And you're still stuck in this hole. And the next day you see someone walking past, you know it's not even worth asking for help. And by this time, you know what every inch of this hole feels like. And you look up and you kind of plead and you say, help. And you look over, and next thing you know, the person's in the hole with you. And you look at him and say, what are you doing? Now we're both stuck. And they put an arm around you and they say, we are not stuck. I've been in this hole before, and I know the way out.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we get to do. I think that is what we get to do when we have been given a life, when we have been given a life back. We get to jump in that hole and help people get out. And I don't know who else knows how to do that. My younger brother jumped in that hole with me. He had been sober 4 years by the time I got sober. And when we get back, I'll explain like the events that happened that got me there. But I needed somebody to jump in that hole.
Yeah. I love that analogy, that story. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, that is so deep. And with your permission, I'd like to use it on other shows
because I think I stole it from someone else.
Oh, well, good. Well, that's what we all do, right? Yeah. Even coaches and speakers.
I heard it from initially, so I can't even give them credit anymore. Yeah. It's been so long.
Yeah. Well, let's take this time to take a quick little break, and we'll come back, and I'd like to hear the story of your brother jumping in that hole with you. I think that would be a great second half of the show.
Like to make sure we get into recovery.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Okay, absolutely. Guys, stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello, my friends. This is Brad Neufeld, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Resilience Talk Network. You can listen to my show, Resilience, every morning, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. On my show, we will be discussing what it takes for you to overcome the day-to-day challenges that all of us face in life, as well as some of the devastating ones that may lead us to feelings of hopelessness and despair. It's my goal to provide you with the tools and skills that you need to overcome anything that is thrown your way. To find out more about my show, visit our website at www.resiliencetalk.com. That's www.resiliencetalk.com. And as always, until we meet again, go for everything that you want in life and make it happen.
Do you know someone who's gambling with death due to an addiction? Do you know someone whose life is being turned upside down due to a loved one that's battling with addiction? Hi, I'm Al Richards. I am the host of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. I started the podcast due to my wife's battle with alcohol. Let's just say I became addicted to her addiction. Our podcast is helping people understand a little more about those who have battled addiction and those who are hurting from their addiction. Through raw vulnerability, we share stories that help uncover the root causes of addiction. Shame felt on both sides, matter of the conscious and subconscious mind, continued beliefs, and often confusing paths of recovery. We collaborate with real people and their stories, as well as licensed professionals, to help our audience gain a better understanding of addiction. You can find us on Resilience Talk Network. You can also find us on Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. That's Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. You can also find us on YouTube. Just look up the Other Side of Addiction podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Other Side of Addiction with our special guest today, Jon Redd, and our special guest co-host, Mason.
Yeah.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much again for being here. Really, really do appreciate it. Jon, man, you had my eyes filling up with some tears quite a few times during your talk and during the first half of the show, and I can feel it. I mean, really, your story is incredible. What's happened in your life is just, something else. Right before we went to the commercial break, we were talking about falling in that dark hole and asking people for help as they walked by. And you talked about the third person that actually fell in the hole with you and grabbed you by the arm and said, I've been in this hole too. I'm going to show you the way out. And you said that your brother did that for you. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I am the oldest of 6 kids, and I've got 4 brothers. And what happened in my life was one of the brothers had decided to go into recovery. He put himself into treatment, and it was 4 years before I actually got help. So he was 4 years sober. And he was reaching out and just trying to see what he could do to help me. And it was an interesting thing because we used to kind of run and gun a little bit together. And I was on the phone with him one time, and he said, when I picked up my 4-year chip, I gave one to mom and dad, and I gave one to grandma. And I remember I was driving, and I remember exactly where I was. And I remember thinking to myself, has it really been 4 years? Because for me, it felt like it had been maybe 9 or 10 months, and everything in my life had completely fallen apart and gotten worse. And he helped keep planting these little seeds. And so he was trying to do it based on, he wasn't promoting it. He wasn't telling me what I had to do. He kept inviting me to meetings. He just made me feel loved and invited. And by coming around him more and being a part of that, I realized so much in my life of what I was missing. And so I had a really specific event that happened, and it was the summer of 2017. And my in-laws had given their side of the family a trip to Newport Beach, California, down to Oceanside, right up by Newport, and we were going to go in the summer. And I am somebody who I absolutely love Newport Beach. It feels like every time I've been there, it's 85 degrees, and it's always the right kind of 85. It's the wind. The weather's been perfect every time I've been there. You get to watch the sunset over the ocean. For folks from Utah who haven't been there, I tell people it's almost like Park City, but on the ocean. Like, it is just this beautiful town, and I was so excited to go, and it was a couple days before the vacation, and my wife came to me and told me I wasn't going. And she's heard me tell this story a bunch. And so it was a few years ago, my wife pulled me aside and said, Jon, you keep telling people you were uninvited on the trip. She says, you actually weren't uninvited on the trip. She goes, you were never invited to start with. I just had to tell you. And I'm like, ooh, that's harsh. Accurate, but harsh. And so I'm home alone, and my wife and 4 kids go with her parents to Newport Beach, California. And I am getting just an insight to what a mess my life had become. And I remember I was home, and I felt like I was out of options. And I told you in the first half of the show how I had been to the Graduate School of Social Work to earn the credentials to be a licensed substance abuse counselor, how I'd been through these processes. And I had quite honestly applied everything I could think of to help me. I'd put all this effort into it, and all that had happened was I'd become worse. And so I went through I was home, I went through the house, and I locked all the doors, and I pulled the blinds, which was an interesting thing for me to do because I was not somebody people came to visit. And I went down to a room in the basement, and I went and I sat in this room and actually locked that door. And I did the only thing I could think of doing at the time, which was I just sat there and I said the most sincere prayer I've ever said, which was just simply, God, if there's a way out of this, please help me. Because I didn't know where else to turn.
Right.
And my life at that time was so heavy. that I remember just waking up thinking, man, if you can just survive today, tomorrow has to get better. And when I'd wake up tomorrow, it was worse. And I was convinced there was no way out of it. And what happened after that prayer, it was the one thing I could think of doing in my complete desperation. And it was the one place I knew that I could just try to ask for help. And within a day or two after that prayer, the job that I tell people it was a job that I had, but I wasn't really working the job. It was a commission-only job. I wasn't getting paid. It was something I was doing, and I was so excited because they gave me business cards. So I felt like I was a part of something. And they called me and told me I wasn't welcome in the office anymore.
Oh, jeez.
My wife came back from Newport Beach, California, and she had a resolve on her face that I'd never seen. And she looked at me and she said, Jon, I do not care if we stay married or get divorced anymore. All I know right now is you have to leave. We cannot have you here anymore. And I went up to my parents' house, and my parents have had a couple kids who have been through recovery, and so that, at times they've been pretty good enablers. And I went up there and I asked them for help, and my parents just looked at me and said, Jon, we're willing to help you, but we're not going to help you your way. And it was a day after that I had a chance to go to treatment. And I am convinced of something in my life today. And that is sometimes when I feel like my world is falling apart, it is God's way of bringing it together. But I was in the middle of it and I couldn't see it. If I felt like I had a job to work towards, I may not have gone to treatment. If I feel like my wife was looking back on it, thinking if my wife said I could be there and we were going to work things out, there's not a way in the world I would have gone to treatment. If my parents would have said, sure, move into the basement, there's not a way I would have gone to treatment. All of those things had to happen for me to be willing to get help. So I went into treatment, and you mentioned some of your friends. I went into a treatment center here in Utah, and it was one that my little brother was working at. And they brought me in, and I was so broken. And I remember the morning I was heading into treatment, and my twins, these twins that I told you my wife was pregnant with, were 14 years old. And they were in the kitchen, and I remember saying, Dad's going to be gone for a couple months. I'm going to treatment. Can I get a hug? And the twins are a boy and girl. And the boy came up and just patted me on the arm and said, good luck, Dad. And he turned and walked off. And my daughter, who was across the room, waved at me and said, you know what, Dad, I'm late for the bus. And she left. And it was that experience broke my heart, because what happened in that experience is I realized the effects of my disease it had on my kids. I wasn't somebody who used with them. I wasn't somebody who used in front of them. I thought I was being secretive. I thought I wasn't really affecting everyone around me. And I did not realize the effect that it had had on my family. And there's a part in the AA Big Book, and it's on page 18, and it says, with this disease goes an annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. And looking back at my life, I had sufficiently annihilated everything worthwhile. And then the sentence after that says, it engulfs all whose lives touch the sufferers. And I did not realize the extent that I had engulfed my family in this until that moment. And so I went to treatment, and with a willingness to do whatever they asked me to do to try to have a new life. And what I realized while I was there is that I had to quite literally restructure my life from the ground up. They say if you need to change one thing, it's change everything, and that's what I was willing to do. So I went to treatment, and there was a lot of talk about honesty, and I know I'm not the only one this applies to, but I was possibly the most dishonest person I had ever met at that point when I went in. I used to tell people that it had gotten so bad that the only person who actually believed the crap coming out of my mouth anymore was me. Like, no one else bought it.
Yeah.
And I kept saying it almost to just protect myself in a way. And so it could have been, like, my honesty was so bad, Al, it could have been simply that if I thought you were a Chick-fil-A fan, and on the way here I had McDonald's down the street, and you said, did you eat on the way here? I would have said, yeah, I had Chick-fil-A. It's what we both like. Like, if the truth would work, I'd still give someone a lie, and I have no idea why. But what I realized is that I had to change so much with myself. So I was in treatment on my 20-year wedding anniversary, which, if you have any listeners out there that are looking for good ideas on how to spend a 20,
Yeah.
don't put that on the list.
That wouldn't be it.
Like, that's for sure not it.
That or Valentine's, right?
Yeah, that or Valentine's. But my wife came in to treatment, and the night of our 20-year wedding anniversary was our first couples processing session. And I remember feeling so small that my wife had to come visit her husband in treatment on the 20-year wedding anniversary. And my wife came to the door, and she came in and she told me it was the best anniversary gift I'd ever given her.
Wow.
And I knew I was where I needed to be. So we went back for a couples processing session, and I remember the counselor asked my wife, what is it that she wanted to see out of me? And she said, well, I want him never to use. I want him never to relapse. And the counselor laughed, like, in a kind way, not mockingly, and said, he can't promise that. But what he can promise is to be honest and transparent going forward. And if he's honest and transparent, you'll see a relapse long before it ever happens. And there are times in this world where I believe you hear something, and then also times where you feel something. And when he said that, I felt it in my core, and I knew that's what I had to do. So I made a promise to be honest and transparent, so that if this was a concern, she would see it long before it ever happened. And work to start this process of rebuilding my life. And I had been so deceptive with so much of my life that it was a struggle with all the things I had to get honest about. But I was willing to do that. I felt like I owed the people in my life honesty. And what I realized in that process is that I owed myself honesty. And now some people may take it for granted, but to the best of my ability, I get to be an honest person today. Such a big deal for me.
Yeah.
So I was getting ready to leave treatment, and the therapist had pulled me aside and told me that if I wanted to stay sober, that I would go get a job at Costco or at Walmart or someplace. And I thought he was nuts. I was really in my ego, and I was explaining to him the degrees I had and how important I had been at one point in time in my life, and how going in working at Costco or Walmart was not going to work. And he stopped me and he said, John, I don't think you're hearing me. He said, what I'm telling you is if you want to stay sober, you're going to go get a job at a place that you can check in, put in an honest day's work, and check out. And he goes, that's what you need right now. And I didn't necessarily want to, but I went and got a job at Costco 2 days after leaving that program. So right after residential, I got a job at the Costco in Bountiful, Utah. And to this day, my 7 months at Costco was the best job I've ever had. And a few things happened while I was there. I was at Costco and I was attending the IOP program at night. And Costco had scheduled me during IOP. And I thought that I was in great shape. I thought, okay, I don't have to attend IOP. The rehab told me to get the job. I've got the job. Now I can miss some of the classes. And I spoke to the therapist at the IOP, and he let me know that I either had to quit the job and find a new one, or I had to go talk to him about switching my schedule. And I went in and I asked my manager, and my manager at the time said, we don't switch the schedule for new people. This is not going to happen. I need you to speak to the general manager of the store. And I remember how terrified I was, because it had been so long since I worked at a place that wanted me to work there. It felt like every other job I'd gotten for years that hire me thinking I was something. And then when I started showing up, or not showing up for that matter, they put a lot of work and effort into getting rid of me.
Yeah.
And I could tell these guys wanted me to work. And I loved being there. So I went and spoke to the general manager of the store. And of course, I had all of these thoughts and all of these ideas of what I could tell her. And then I remembered that I had made a promise to be honest and transparent. And so her name was Sandy, and Sandy sat me down and said, Jon, we understand you're asking for a couple nights a week off, and we don't give new people nights off. Why do you need these nights off? And I took a breath and I looked at Sandy and I said, Sandy, I am an alcoholic. And I'm in these classes because I'm trying to learn how to be well. And I want to be a husband, and I want to be a father, and I want to be an employee, and I need these classes to do that. And Sandy got up from behind the desk and she gave me a hug. And she said, Jon, we will never schedule you those nights. No one's ever honest with me, and I can feel that you're honest. And I remember leaving that office feeling so much lighter.
I bet.
Feeling like there's really something to this. That experience at Costco taught me that I'm okay to be honest and transparent with people in my life. I went to treatment and I learned some things while I was in recovery, or while I was in residential treatment for me. I went to treatment on the hopes of just getting clean. And what happened while I was at treatment is I realized that the only way I was going to get clean is if I was willing to take out the garbage. So I was willing to talk about the things that I was never willing to talk about. I was willing to process through the stuff that I thought I'd never process through. I get to have a really beautiful life today because I tell people I don't have any secrets. I have no secrets. I have things I keep private.
Right.
Because there are aspects of my life that are not everyone's business. Mm-hmm. But I don't have anything I keep secret. And it is so freeing and so liberating to be able to live that way.
Nobody can hold anything over your head when it's that way, right?
It's a beautiful thing. Like yeah. I've been let go of jobs in sobriety, and it's been for reasons kind of just outside of me. And I remember when it happens thinking, well, I don't know what I could have done better. Like I tried. I showed up and I put my effort in and I tried, which also to me means that I don't need to worry as much about what's coming next. And so that to give you an idea, I was working at a treatment center, and I had a position that was, I'm kind of jumping around here, but to give you an idea of how this worked out for me. And I was working at this treatment center, and I had a position that had a lot of responsibility to it, and it was the morning that I turned 4 years sober, and I don't even know how to tell you how excited I was to be 4. I was so grateful. I remember waking up that morning just beside myself that I actually get to be 4 that day. And I went up to the center, and that morning I got laid off. And the owner said, you're our most expensive employee, and I'm bringing, some folks in to do this, and I got to let you go. And I was driving back home from this facility that morning, and I called my little brother, and I try to call him every year on my birthday. I actually do call him every year on my birthday, and I thank him. And I called him, and I thanked him. And he said, well, what's going on, John? And I explained to him how I'd gotten laid off. And at the end of the call, he said, well, congratulations. And I said, well, man, it's been like a great 4 years. He said, not on that, you idiot. He said, congratulations on God moving you where you couldn't move yourself. And he couldn't have been more right. The things that have happened and come into my life in the past year, in 3-4 months, in the direction it's gone, there's not a way that could have happened had this not happened. And so I just believe that a lot of times, because I'm emotionally involved in my life, because it's mine.
Yeah.
That there are times where I feel like my life's falling apart. And I don't get to see till I'm away from it a little bit that it's God's way of just bringing it together. And so I today do my best to wake up, and I told you I do like meditation and prayer in the morning and different things, and do my best to just seek His will for me. Which always involves asking Him for an opportunity to help His kids. I'm somebody who took so much from this world for so long.
Yeah.
That I love having the opportunity to try to get back to it.
It's your way of, it's like Dave DeRocher said in one of his talks. For many years, he destroyed lots of people and his life, and once he vowed to make a change, now his goal is to help as many lives as possible. And it sounds like you're the same way, John. That's exactly what you want to do, And I felt that from the day one you and I met at that networking group. So it takes people like yourself and so many other people out there to do that same thing. Because, right, I mean, you need someone to jump in that dark hole with you who's been there.
Who's been there and who knows the way out.
Who knows the way out, right. And they're not going to mislead you, They're not going to mislead you like the people that you hung around with who did the drugs with you, right? Most of that's manipulating because their goal is to get their fix or manipulate their way through the system, however. And
whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
It's just part of the process. And I had, when I got out of treatment, it wasn't easy. Has been a lot to repair with family. Like I said, my twins weren't looking to give me a hug when I left, and I've done imperfectly, but to the best of my ability for 5 years, what I can to show up for them.
Yeah. Well, and that's all we could do, right?
Yeah. I've got a couple family stories, or I've got work stories, or I've got do you have a direction you would like this to go?
No, my gosh, everything that was shared was just, incredible. And we still have just a little bit of time left. We've got another show that's coming in after ours, and I want to respect their time. With what you were saying, John, with your brother saying congratulations that God's moving you on your next step, I use this saying on our Wednesday show for our closing, and it says, when God gives you a new beginning, it starts with an ending. Be thankful for closed doors. They often guide us to the right one. And when you allow life just to be life, right? And instead of trying to control it, like you mentioned at the start of the show, and I've done the same damn thing. Is it going to be perfect? No, it's not. You're still going to hit walls and crash into different things. However, the comeback is a hell of a lot easier, and it goes a little smoother, right?
The process is much smoother. I used to explain to people that my life was like this really heavy, complicated game of chess, and that I would have to figure out what lies I'm telling people, where I'm going to go. I was always trying to calculate 3-4 moves down.
Yeah.
And what's happened through recovery, well, so at 43 years old when I got sober, I actually realized I'm not very good at chess. I'm not very good at this life game the way I'd been playing it. And what happened in recovery is my life is much smoother and much easier today. And I tell people, I simply show up and play checkers. It is God's board. I do whatever's in front of me to be done to the best of my ability, knowing that that's enough.
Yeah.
And knowing that whatever moves down the road I need to make, he already has a path lined out for me for it. And if I'm honest, and if I go through it open-mindedly, and if I'm doing what's in front of me to be done, that's enough.
Yeah.
And I have a beautiful life as a result of that.
Yeah, it changes, right? And it changes really quicker than what we realize.
Yeah,
I mean,
drastically.
It really does, and when you were talking about manipulating and lies, I always looked at myself as a pretty good dude, When I lost my job of 24 years because of failed UA,
Yeah.
that was during my weekend cocaine and alcohol use, I had a few friends come to me and said, we never trusted you. And I'm like, how could you not? I never stole from you. I always respected you, your family. We'd party together. We'd go over for our kids' birthdays together. We celebrated births together. And they said, no, we don't trust you because we could never believe what you were telling us. And I started really thinking about that. And I remember all the times, even through my work, how I was doing my best to manipulate things, and not saying, because, in the manufacturing business, you got to do your job right, because anytime production's down, thousands and thousands of dollars are being lost. However, like during maintenance times, when you've got more of a free time, if there was a way that, to cut a corner, like you got to weld something on a tank or whatever, and instead of going through all the process with security and managers to get a hot work permit, it's like, I'll just hurry and frickin' do it. No one's not going to know, and it always came back and bit me. However, did I still learn from it? I didn't. And it took those people to tell me that.
Yeah.
When I started realizing I'm not the person who I thought I was. And since 2009 up to this date, I've been working on myself to be that honest person. And sometimes it sucks being the honest person, because you say things and you don't say it to hurt an individual. You say it because at least they know where you stand, right? And I tell my wife that quite a bit, because sometimes I'll say things and it comes across, so either it's my tone or however I'm putting across, but it's like, that's not what I'm meaning. I just want you to know where I'm standing.
Yeah.
Because it's much easier that way. Because if I bullshit and tippy-toe around the bush, I'm going to be tippy-toeing around the bush for a hell of a freaking long time, right? Because I'm going to try to catch that tail all the time. Yeah. And I vowed to at those times that I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, you're playing chess.
Yeah, and now I've had people tell me that I'm too honest to a fault. And I'm like, well, how is that possible? But again, it's just because I speak my mind, because I want people to know where I stand. And it's not to hurt anyone. It's just like, this is where I stand, right? And it sounds like you're doing the same thing. Not kind of, you're doing it.
To the best of my ability. And I don't come on to proclaim that I'm doing anything perfectly.
Right.
But at least I'm doing it to the best of my ability, and I'm trying. And someone gave me a quote early on, and they explained to me that honesty without love is cruelty. And that it is my job that when I speak truth, to speak with love. And what that's become is I believe that there's a spiritual component to truth. I believe that when someone's speaking truth to you, and speaking truth to you with love, you can actually feel it.
Yeah.
And so that's...
Good point.
That's what I try to go towards today. And do I do it perfectly? Absolutely not. My wife would probably tell you I'm horrendous at it. But I know that I'm trying. I know that I'm trying.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's well put. My wife would probably tell me the same thing. So, gosh, yeah, I wish we didn't have another show coming in, because I know we could go at least another hour on this easy. Our longest podcast is 2 hours and 18 minutes, which is crazy. I don't know how many people actually sit, and I'm sure they listen to it in spots, but Mason, you've been extremely quiet through this. You've been absorbing a lot of stuff, right?
Really good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. You've really been, you've been like a sponge on this show. It's like you've been absorbing.
Always a sponge.
Wow. Gosh, this whole frickin' show has just been incredible. And again, I say that a lot with a lot of our shows, and I truly mean it. I truly mean it. And again, I've said this a couple times, John. When you and I first met, you sat down next to me and we were introduced and just chatting with you. I mean, I think we ended up talking for like about 40 minutes, I think, and you're telling me your story and kind of where life went. And that's why I wanted to ask you to come on and share, because I know a lot of our listeners can gain something from it, and we've said many times on this show that even if we just help one person, if one person out there in the audience hears this show or shares it with someone and it helps one person, everything that we've gone through has been worth it, right? Because that snowballs, then that one person gives it all help another, and it gives it meaning, and it goes back to that story that I've said a few times here, that I went to an AA meeting with my wife one time, and this guy gets up and gets his 10, 15, 20-year chip, and right off the bat he says, every day I hit my knees and thank God for making me an alcoholic. And I remember leaning over to my wife and I said, that guy is effing nuts.
Yeah.
And then as he went through his story, I kind of started getting it. Now, did I still get it fully? No, I didn't. Until now, years later, I understand why now, because he's on a path where he's fallen in that dark hole and he's grabbing somebody's arm and he's helping him get out.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why he's thanking God for his experience, and how many times do you hear people say that, even people who have been very, very wealthy, build all their riches up, and then that dark horse rode in and they jumped on it and it took them down a deep hole and they lost everything, and then they finally figured things out and they got back on in the saddle and they switched horses, and you see all the many good things that they're doing, and I don't think any of us would be doing what we are doing today if we hadn't have fallen in that hole, right?
No, and I get to be grateful for, like I told you, I'm now grateful for cancer with looking back at it, because cancer is part of what got me here.
Yeah.
And the life I have today is unlike any life I've ever lived before. Like I enjoy waking up in the morning. I enjoy connecting with people.
Yeah.
I have this higher power God in my life that I wouldn't trade for anything today. That is quite literally more important to me than anything you could name right now.
Yeah.
And what it does is it gives me a sense of direction. It gives me peace. It gives me these things that I'd never had before. So I'm a very grateful alcoholic, because it took that to get here.
Yeah.
And without that, I wouldn't be here, and it's never been as good as here. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it does. Right? I mean, to me, it does.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I'm grateful for my road that I traveled down, and I'm grateful for my wife's alcoholism, and she teases me every once in a while, and she says, this podcast, basically, it's my idea. It isn't your idea. She goes, well, it wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for my alcoholism. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, you're right. But she's right. She's 100% right. That's what led us to be here.
Tell her I said thank you.
I will.
Yeah.
I will, definitely. And it's crazy too, because she was certified to be a certified peer support specialist, and it's been hard for her to find a job because of her background,
Yeah.
and the assault charges that she has on it, and the state won't allow her, which is funny. They allow her to get the certificate, but they won't allow her to work anywhere. But anyway, she landed a job at Papillon. She's in training this week, and she's just all excited that she's gotten herself out of the accounts payable job that she's done for 17, 18 years. Well, yeah, she hasn't worked for quite a few years because of her addiction. However, now she's doing something where she's jumping in the hole.
Beautiful.
Grabbing people's arms and saying, come on, I've walked this walk, let me help you. So it's cool.
Beautiful.
Cool. Yeah. Well, guys, thank you so much for being here. Both of you guys, really appreciate it. And Jon, it's been a blessing that I got to meet you. You know, I mean, really, I hope that we'll run into each other again, and I hope we can continue to build this relationship. And maybe there's things down the road where, I don't know, maybe there's something we could work on or change. And you know, I'm looking at starting a networking group, you know, like I said, here in the valley, and doing something different, and because I just want to start giving more back as well. And yeah, just thank you. So,
thank you. We'd love it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
thank you
Absolutely.
Great lessons in this.
Yeah, guys, this has been just a really great show. A lot of great information that Jon shared with us, and I'm sure you guys could hear in the voice, and I'm sure even with the cameras, there's a lot of emotion that's happened today, you know, and I think that's why after I do shows on Thursdays, I go home and literally I'm exhausted. I really am, and I do believe it's because of all the emotions that come through, because I feel it, you know, and I've just recently started sharing my story. Up until about a week ago, I finally started telling my story, and when my wife walked in to come and watch the show, she wasn't expecting me to be doing my story because our guest, something happened with our guest and they couldn't be on. And I just thought, well, today's the day. And I shared my story for the first time, and the look on her face was like complete shock. I'm surprised she didn't go in cardiac arrest, to be honest with you. But it felt good. It felt good to get things out. So, guys, thank you to all our listeners, all our sponsors, Resilience Talk Network, everyone behind the scenes that helps us out, man. All our guests, co-hosts. None of this would be possible if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you so much for everything, all your love and support and kindness. And remember this, addiction is giving up everything for one thing, and recovery is giving up one thing for everything. We're out.